Now, in his memoir, The Door, An Addict's Journey, entrepreneur and a social activist Abner Mariri pens harrowing details of a time filled with darkness, danger and all that comes with addiction. He looks back at the desperation for repeated hits while working as a counselor and how this addiction affected his family. He joins us now in studio to tell us more about the book. Tate Mariri, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your time this morning.
No, ke a leboga monyetla, and thank you for the opportunity to be here, and to all the listeners who are watching across the country, thank you.
Of course,
Yes,
of course.
yes.
You know, I look at the title of the book, The Door,
Yes.
An Addict's Journey.
Yes.
And when I think about a door, you either go through a door to step out on a journey,
Yes.
or you go through a door to return home from
That's
a journey.
Right. That's right.
And I wonder where that fits in your story.
Where it fits in my story, the door, I actually deal with about 7 doors, and I give only 2 doors. It is a closed door and literally a door of hope. And it basically chronicles my journey with active addiction, and effectively deals with where I come from, where I grew up, the upbringing. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I'll be sitting here in the studio talking about my journey with addiction. And in a simplified, more pragmatic version, I sort of try to engage the reader so that the story flows. And in the manner that it flows, I talk about the wrong door, the right door, a closed door, a dangerous door. So I take the reader through a process of where I come from, and how I always wanted to become better and better my life, and better myself, and better my family. And unfortunately, through the process, I end up finding myself in a situation that I never thought I could find myself in, and that is taking drugs. And eventually that threw my life in a basically in a different tangent completely. And it was very, very, very difficult. And eventually, obviously, I had to find something to do to get rid of the situation. You know, drugs for me, I hate drugs with a passion, and I love recovery. There is a culture of recovery and a culture of addiction. And now I'm in the culture of recovery, trying to assist people to get rid of that situation.
Yeah.
But by and large, you know, I spent about 14 years in the U.S., studied and worked in the U.S., never touched a glass of alcohol, never touched a beer, nothing. And I come home, cataclysmic events obviously take place that forced me to find myself in that situation. A loss of a son, a loss of a brother, and before long, my own coping mechanism was that I took copious amounts of alcohol, and subsequently finding myself at the wrong place at the wrong time. I was offered something that I could not refuse, and eventually I succumbed. Nobody goes into active addiction thinking that they'll become a drug addict. No one does that. We always think that we are stronger. It's always the next person. It's never me. But unfortunately, I lived in an illusion, and I found myself in active addiction. And yeah, I did things that I never thought that I could do.
You talk about right choices, wrong choices, right
Yes.
doors, wrong doors. The title of the book is The Door, An Addict's Journey. And I wonder, is that how you take the reader through the journey that could possibly be theirs? I mean, you just
Correct.
mentioned now that a lot of the time the narrative in the mind of an addict is to say, it's them, never me. And so I wonder if through the book you're inviting the reader to see how any choice really could easily land you up in a position like this, and to start being a little bit more cognizant about the choices that we make.
Yes. It took me practically 5 years to pen the book, 4.5 to be specific. 2.5 years is the last chapter, because I process a lot in the 2.5 years, and that includes my family, my wife, the people I've hurt, the damage that I've caused. It took a toll on me, in a sense, because sometimes I would find myself just with a writer's block, sitting on my computer and trying to type. And when the emotions come forth of what I'd done, I couldn't believe that I actually did that. So to answer your question, yes, I take the reader through what I've been. You know, I considered myself successful and knew money. and I was getting ahead in life. And my life was on a good trajectory, and unfortunately it took a wrong door, a wrong turn. And this could happen to anybody, you know, I've discovered. And that wrong turn, I found myself wanting in many areas. And I lost a son, I lost a brother. And like I said, my coping mechanism was copious amounts of alcohol and an intake of drugs. And I found myself on a destructive path that unfortunately beggars description and staggers the imagination. So I take my reader through a process of them understanding that they have to be careful. It can happen to anybody. We are prone to make mistakes in a country where we are struggling with mental health, with toxic masculinity and gender-based violence. They are all interrelated. And with COVID and people having been locked out and people having to lost their jobs, lost businesses. They have different coping mechanisms. And I think for me, this book is incredibly timely for the reader because it's practical. I think when you pick it up, you cannot put it down. And I want to encourage people to really get the copy. I found myself in city places. I was at my first recovery. It was Hugh Masekela, the late, may God rest his soul, and Lebo M, who basically took me to my first rehab, and I relapsed inside the rehab.
Wow.
And I came out, went to my second attempt at recovery, relapsed at my second attempt as well, and eventually checked myself at South Coast Recovery Center for 8 months. And that's when I recovered my life, and that's when the journey to recovery began. And when I came out, I'd lost practically everything. You know, I'd worked hard, built houses, had practically everything, shares, and I sold it and I smoked it to drugs, and I was literally down to one car. I never thought that I had the strength to pick up a microwave and walk to a dealer's place to go and cash it in for drugs at 2 o'clock in the morning. I lied, I stole, I manipulated, I was full of grandiosity and pride. I was arrogant, I was self-centered, it was all about me. I cared nothing about anybody. I had amazing children, and I'm a father, a husband. I think there's no strip joint that have not been in this city. But thank God that on the 5th of May this year, I'll be celebrating almost 11 years, clean time, you know, from drugs that almost took my life. So I take my reader in a process for them to understand that it could happen to anybody, and that if not careful, you could end up in the doldrums of addiction, and unfortunately it's a one destructive path that you will follow.
Yeah, it sounds like it's an important story that our readers need to get exposed to, and sounds nothing at all like a township boy memoir, but we are going to have to leave it there.
No, thank you.
Abner Mariri, thank you so much for your time.